Hello, I'm James Reynolds of Days of Our Lives, Abe Carper, as many of you know, and I'm here with Ms. Jackie Harry.
Paulina.
On Days of Our Lives.
Your wife.
My wife. My wife on Days of Our Lives. That's why we're talking to you today, because we become husband and wife on June 19th of this year, and so we thought we'd come over here and talk a little bit about the significance of June 19th, which is known as
Juneteenth.
When did you first hear about Juneteenth?
I heard about Juneteenth when I was maybe 12.
Really?
I was born in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. A lot of people don't know this. Yes, and to this day, they party down on Juneteenth. They party hard, but it's known as the Day of Reparations for when the slaves were emancipated by Abraham Lincoln. And a lot of slaves didn't know they were emancipated, so when they found out, they celebrated.
They celebrated, exactly.
They came together, and a lot of slaves migrated up north. My family migrated from North Carolina, South Carolina, up to New York City.
When Abraham Lincoln put out the Emancipation Proclamation, it was in 1863, and it was right in the middle of the Civil War. And basically, the Emancipation Proclamation only freed the slaves in the states that were in rebellion.
Yes.
North Carolina would have been
South
one
Carolina.
of those, South Carolina, and that was it. So the truth of the matter is, slaves weren't free everywhere.
You're right, it was a microcosm. It was small, and it was an affiliation of maybe 5 states.
And the word didn't get to Texas until 1865. There are a lot of reasons for that. One of those is that a lot of slave owners in the rest of the South had shipped their slaves to Texas so that the Union wouldn't free them.
Wouldn't claim them.
So they could
Yes.
save them out, because they considered them property. So they didn't know about, news traveled slow. There was no internet in
And
those
they didn't
days.
tell them.
A lot of the plantation owners wanted the harvest in before they
before.
told their slaves. They
Those
didn't
big
tell them.
plantations, they were working, on some cases they were working, and they said 2 months later, and they were in the kitchen, and they'd come out, and all the white slave masters would be gone, and
Yeah.
they'd just be left alone. They didn't know what to do, and they said, why wouldn't they know what to do? Because they never had
They never
control
told
of their
them.
own lives and
Yeah.
destinies and their own routines.
There's
there were no
there's
opportunities.
a story with my family. I'll tell everybody a little bit later about that really just dovetails into what you just said.
So I've known
But
about it. And also in Oklahoma, you had a huge population that did not know they were free, and they were building trains, railroads.
Oh, yeah.
For years, and now the reparations there have begun.
Bowie, Oklahoma, and then Kansas, Nicodemus. There were a number of towns that were founded by former slaves. It is literally a national holiday now.
Yeah, Joe
It
Biden,
is
President Joe Biden.
Exactly, made it a national holiday.
Yes.
And which is wonderful. And so more and more people will have an idea of what Juneteenth celebrated.
And a lot of black people don't know what Juneteenth is either.
A lot of people know. Yes, a lot of people don't.
They
Yes,
think
you're
it's just a
exactly
party.
right.
But
a
it
lot of black
definitely
people don't
it
know
goes
what
back to the
Juneteenth
freeing.
is. Yes.
Yeah, the freeing of the
You're
slaves
right.
with the Emancipation Proclamation,
You're right.
specifically, not just the
Yeah.
end of the war, because the end of the war did not signify emancipation. Abraham Lincoln had to sign that into law. A lot of people don't know
Oh,
that.
well, that's why it didn't be. It was simply what we call today an executive order, and then it didn't become reality until the 13th Amendment was passed, that did away with slavery. Period. That was 1865. That was almost the end of the Civil War.
He had to fight to sign it.
Yeah, and fortunately, Abraham Lincoln this is before his assassination, and I always wonder what would have happened if they hadn't passed the 13th Amendment before he died. But the 13th Amendment is what codified the end of slavery. The interesting thing about the 13th Amendment is there's a line in there. It does away with slavery, except if you are a prisoner. And so prisoners can be used without pay. The Louisiana State Prison is an example of that. We're all familiar with chain gangs and people building roads and all of that, and that's because there is that one exception in the 13th Amendment.
But it's a merging of 2 days. It's the 18th and the 19th, and that's why they call it Juneteenth. So because it happened, it didn't happen overnight. They didn't know that they were free. Yes.
Well, we're bringing people up on. Hopefully, we gave them a little snippet of what Juneteenth's about. And thank you for sharing this moment with me.
Thank you.
We're going to continue the conversation a bit more about Juneteenth. And just to bring you up to speed on why we're talking about Juneteenth. One is the importance of the day that is now an official holiday and in this country. And the other is the importance of Juneteenth to Days of Our Lives and the upcoming event of Abe and Paulina's wedding. And which in Abe and Paulina's wedding, we're trying to observe African American traditions as they actually happen and as they actually were. If you recall, when both Eli and Lonnie got married, they jumped the broom, which is another one of those traditions that happened in the slave days. And the tragedy of marriage during slavery was that marriage was either had to be done quietly and secretly or had to be done under the auspices of whoever the owner of the plantation or the ranch or the farm was. And more frequently than you know, it didn't bind those people together. It didn't bind those families together. And quite frequently, those families would be torn apart. One of our great-great-great-grandfathers, he was told that he was going to be sold. And he was aware that the only way he could stay with his family, his wife and his children, was if he was damaged in some way, physically damaged in some way. And he actually went out the night before that trade was to go through and cut his finger off on a chopping block that they use for taking the heads off of chickens, and thinking that being maimed and not being physically whole, that he wouldn't be traded and he would be able to live his life with his wife and children. But the next morning, instead of his being traded, his wife and children were traded, and he watched them being driven away in a wagon. And as I understand it, his life was very short after that. He found it very hard to maintain his sanity, as I'm sure a lot of you would. And just another brief story. I come from a little town in Kansas called Oskaloosa, Kansas. My family were slaves in Missouri. All the family knew were that the owners of the plantation had left a couple weeks before, and nobody knew where they were, and my family had no idea where to go. They just stayed there. And when a troop of Union cavalry came through and told them that the war was over, and they were free to go. They could do whatever they wanted. And it was a concept that was a little alien. They didn't quite understand what they meant. But in their good fortune, the commander of this troop was a man who had a lot of humanity and understood the difficulty for these folks to understand that now they were masters of their own fate. And he said, join us, we're gonna go to Kansas, and there are several small towns there, and you can probably live your life. And he said, anything here that you want, take it. And apparently my great-great-grandmother only wanted the corset of the lady of the house. So she grabbed the corset, and everybody else grabbed pots and pans and wagons and tools and went and eventually arrived in the hometown that I grew up in, Oskaloosa. And we still live in that house. I grew up in that house. It makes me very proud to have been chosen to be part of this great story, and that our show has chosen to invest itself in telling this real story of our nation's history. And thank you for indulging me for a moment to let you in on a little bit of our nation's history and my personal history.